we are here, mining is not the end. We are in the business of mining to make a difference in the communities in whichever area we operate in. And that balance is really important, because if we keep on evaluating projects or any initiatives just from a technical lens, they are bound to fail.
In mining, partnerships are often defined by contracts, capital, and risk allocation. But many of the relationships that matter most with communities, workers, regulators, and investors don't fail because of flawed economics. They fail because of misunderstood realities. What if partnership in mining were reimagined through empathy? And we're here to have that conversation with Vijay Kumar. Vijay, thank you so much for your time. When we talk about partnerships, I think oftentimes we talk about it in transactional terms, whether we're looking at risk sharing, capital allocation, et cetera, et cetera. What does true partnership really mean if we have a situation where empathy precedes strategy?
Yeah, so for us, true partnership in the current world, the current realities, every ecosystem is so interconnected, and looking at things in isolation is not going to work. So when we talk about partnership, we have to look at returns beyond I would say, the numerical returns that we are used to. Partnership should be looked at. What's the shared prosperity that is being created for the entire ecosystem? Whether it's government, whether it's communities, whether it's your employees, any other stakeholders for that matter. And that is going to be really crucial. Isolation, things cannot work in isolation.
Can you recall a moment in your career where understanding the other stakeholders' constraints, whether it was the community, whether it was the regulator, labor, or suppliers, that moment where you had to understand them changed the outcome of the situation you were dealing with at that time?
Yeah, I'll have to reflect upon my mining journey long time back. While I was working for another mining company. We had a unique situation. The mine had to be expanded, and right next to the mine, there was a community living in, probably 30 odd people, and their primary source of livelihood at that time was herding cattle. And they were living in a very informal settlement. The team worked around as to what is the best way forward for this particular community, so they created really world-class housing for all the people. And they said these people must be relocated to an urban area where they have got access to clean water, electricity, everything else. But none of the community members were willing to relocate. Why? Because their livelihood depends on herding the cattle. How can you take your cattle to an urban area? Where do you keep your cattle? Have you created an ecosystem where now they are empowered to pay the rates and taxes, which in their whole life they had never heard of? So once we understood, going back to the community, really hearing them out as to why they are not moving from, this informal settlement to a world-class housing. Once we understood their pain, then we realized that probably we need to go back to the drawing board, work out a solution which is going to be good for them. Let's not apply this lens of urbanization is going to be good for everybody.
In turnaround situations, you do find that the urgency can be quite high, and there are risks that empathy can be crowded out because there are performance pressures that are now being pushed a bit forward. How do you balance that?
And that's, I think, in situations like this, and what you are talking about, it's quite common, and many times leaders would end up navigating there. How we balance it in our organization is every time we'll have a couple of role players who would say that, does it align with our values? Does it align with what we stand for? And that litmus test and that ability of having open conversations in the organization, that is going to be really crucial. If you have that particular culture, even in most difficult situations, there would be a team member would say, are we missing the core value where we have to balance everybody's interest?
Let's talk about Vedanta for a bit. You're scaling production while at the same time prioritizing issues like safety, sustainability, as well as digital transformation. How does that empathy first lens assist you in being able to grow your projects in the way that you imagine them?
So here, let me also reflect on what our chairman talks about, and he's the founder of the company. One principle that he keeps on applying, that we are here, mining is not the end. We are in the business of mining to make a difference in the communities in whichever area we operate in. So first and foremost, we go through this particular test, that if we are embarking on something, does it align with our values? Does it create that shared prosperity that we are talking about? Does it transform for good? So only when you have applied those lenses, and if there's a tick, then the next stage is, does it meet the financial, technical, and every other requirement? And that balance is really important, because if we keep on evaluating projects or any initiatives just from a technical lens, they are bound to fail.
Is the idea of empathy easy to spread across an organization, or does it hinge on one individual leader?
It's not easy to take it right across the organization. It's a really difficult task. And what I would say, that any leader, it is one of the key accountability of the leader to create that particular culture and continuously keep on having that conversation around empathy so that it becomes a way of life. The classical example was safety. In the safety world, initially, we engineers, I remember myself as a young engineer, I always reflected on that. I know how things must be done, and this is the way it will be done. Now, after 30 years in the industry, I have realized that all the good things in safety that came from is only when I went back to the people who are doing the job, the workforce on the ground. And those learnings, plus my theoretical learning, when they were combined together, that is when the transformational change started happening in the area of safety.
I'm glad you brought that up, because when we talk about empathy, we want to be able to create an organization where individuals can speak up about the risks they see around them before the risks turn into incidents. How do we create an organization where employees are able to speak up?
Two things. First and foremost, the responsibility sits on the leader, that do you live up to that particular value? Do you encourage people coming up? And is speaking up rewarded right across the organization? In the area of safety, that was when the Minerals Council did a deep dive across multiple mining companies as to why we were seeing a plateau in terms of fatality statistics in South Africa. One key thing was people knew what was wrong, but nobody was encouraged to speak up, and many times if you spoke up, there were repercussions. Only when the industry decided to break up that culture, when leaders were approachable, that's where the changes started happening. And there were so many learnings that came up, which, I'll be very honest, even me as a leader, I was never aware of. So, profound moment. What really it relies on as leaders, it's not about just saying that, I'll encourage speaking up. Do I live that particular value? And then is that behavior equally rewarded right across the organization?
As Vedanta, when we talk about empathy and leading from a point of empathy, and obviously that's affecting the different decisions, how do you measure yourself in terms of whether you're meeting your own expectations from that empathy lens?
I would say, it's a complex subject. It's always a complex subject because you can't put a perfect maths around this thing. And the way we measure it is purely from the feedback that we get from our external stakeholders. When we are doing it, what does it feel like from the views of the external ecosystem? What is the feedback we are getting? If our actions are not perceived rightly, or they are not having that meaningful impact which we thought they are going to have, then we have failed. And then we learn, and then again we improvise ourselves.
Can empathy become a competitive advantage for the mining industry, or do you find that the industry is still underestimating its value?
So, see, the days where you had plenty of resources right around the world, where you had plenty of human capital which was available and was willing to work in the mining industry, and also there was plenty of capital which could be easily deployed in the industry. Those days are over. Now we are competing for resources, we are competing for human capital as well as the real capital. In this period, empathy or the culture of the organization, empathy driven organization, is going to set you apart, and that is what is going to draw whichever part of the capital, whether it's human capital, whether you are the partner of choice of governments, because the governments would be flooded with multiple companies wanting to work with them. What sets you apart is, are you close to the ground? Are you going to make that meaningful difference?
A lot of mining leaders are going to be watching this interview and they're going to be hearing us talk about empathy. And I'm sure the first question is going to be, Vijay, I've been thinking about it. We've been talking about it within our organization. Where do we start? What would you say?
Pick up the area where you think you will have the maximum impact. And it depends on organization to organization. If you think that we have got a serious issue in health and safety, start from there. You have to start from somewhere, and the context should matter for different companies. Start at a particular place, keep the eyes and ears open. I'll reflect on what Ben Magara was saying just before my panel. And what he said, it's not only about listening. When you listen, you have to really dissect that message, not from your perspective, but also take the learnings from the perspective of the people that you are listening from, and then shape up the narrative. Only listening is not important. Shape up the narrative and then go and do the litmus test before going on the bandwagon just to say, yes, I'm an empathy-driven organization and I'm going on this journey.
On the topic of listening, do you find that the industry as a collective, are you all listening to each other?
In certain areas, yes.
Yeah.
In certain areas, there's a lot to be done.
Which areas do you believe you're listening?
Health and safety is a great example. Not only within the South African ecosystem, but right across the world, the resources industry not only listens to their partners within the industry, but also we have expanded our listening post to outside the industry. What can we learn from the chemical industry or the airlines industry? So that's a great example. The areas where we have to do a lot of work still, where their constant tension is government relations, the relationship with the community, or just the social development space, as to how can we see that despite all these investments being made by the mining companies, the perception still exists that mining companies are not doing enough.
Vijay, thank you so much for your time. For more mining insights, you can go to miningindaba.com.